From the very beginning of human history, armies have included units that stood out from ordinary soldiers through their training, courage, loyalty, and extraordinary determination. These elite formations, often composed of carefully selected men from various social backgrounds, became symbols of military excellence, unshakable discipline, and immense personal bravery. Over the centuries, units were formed whose names still inspire respect and admiration today, from the Persian Immortals and Spartan hoplites to the Janissaries, Mamluks, and Swiss mercenaries. Today, we will take a look at the first part of elite combat units whose concepts of strength, power, and courage have left an indelible mark on the history of humankind. The Sacred Band of Thebes was formed around 378 BC in the city of Thebes in Boeotia, on the initiative of the general Gorgidas, and later rose to fame under the leadership of Pelopidas. The unit consisted of 300 chosen men, divided into 150 pairs of lovers. This organization was entirely deliberate. The bands believed that strong emotional bonds between the men would create a unit that would never break in battle, as none of them would want to fail in front of the one he loved, whom he would also protect fearlessly. Selection into the unit was not based on origin, but on personal bravery and military skill. Unlike most Greek city militias, which were mobilized only in times of war, the Sacred Band was a permanent, professional force. Its members were trained to perfection in close combat, formed the core of the heavy infantry, and were deployed at the most critical moments of battle. The term sacred derived from the loyalty oath taken at the sanctuary of Iolaus, a hero linked to Heracles, underscoring the unit's spiritual commitment alongside its military role. The strength of the Sacred Band lay not only in training, but above all in moral cohesion. Ancient authors, such as Plutarch, noted that no other force was as steadfast, because warriors bound by love were capable of extraordinary courage. This principle was fully confirmed at the Battle of Tegera in 375 BC, where the unit defeated a much larger Spartan force. Their greatest triumph came 4 years later at Leuctra, when the bands, under Pelopidas and Epaminondas, crushed the Spartan army and ended its centuries-long dominance over Greece. For several decades, the Sacred Band was regarded as an invincible symbol of the band power. Their end came in 338 BC at the Battle of Chaeronea, where they faced the Macedonian forces of Philip II and his son Alexander, later known as the Great. The bands refused to surrender and fought to the last man. The Persian Immortals are among the most famous elite units of antiquity. The name was given to them by the Greek historian Herodotus, who described them as a heavily armed corps numbering 10,000 men. They formed the core of the army of the Achaemenid Persian Empire and served both as the personal guard of the king and as elite infantry deployed in key battles. The unit likely originated during the reign of Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC and, according to tradition, was maintained at full strength at all times. When a soldier fell, became ill, or left the unit, he was immediately replaced. Thanks to this, the unit never diminished and appeared truly immortal. This idea of constant renewal and invincibility gave the Immortals exceptional psychological power, both for Persian soldiers and for their enemies. The Immortals were composed mainly of Persians, Medes, and Elamites, the core peoples of the empire. They belonged to the inner circle of royal power, and their selection was strict. Only physically fit, loyal, and noble men were admitted. They were equipped with luxurious arms symbolizing their status: scale armor, short spears, bows, and shields, often decorated with gold and fine fabrics. In addition to their combat role, they had ceremonial importance, accompanying the king during court festivities and enhancing his majesty. In battle, they functioned as a decisive strike force or as the king's personal reserve. Herodotus mentions them during Xerxes' I's campaign against Greece, including the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. The Spartiates, also known as the homoioi, the equals, formed the core and elite of Spartan society and military power. They were full citizens of the city-state of Sparta, constituting a narrow minority at the top of a rigidly hierarchical society. Historians estimate that true Spartiates made up only between 1/10 and 1/30 of the total population, and their numbers steadily declined over time. The vast majority of the population consisted of helots, state-owned serfs primarily from subjugated Messenia, whose labor supported the Spartan elite and allowed them to focus exclusively on military training. A Spartiate could not be born into a lower class. Membership in this caste required pure lineage and strict selection from birth. Every Spartan boy was assessed by a council of elders, and if deemed fit, entered the state educational system known as the agoge. This upbringing focused entirely on physical fitness, discipline, obedience, and endurance, values meant to shape each Spartiate into a perfect hoplite, a heavily armed infantryman fighting in the phalanx. From an early age, individuality was suppressed in favor of absolute devotion to the state. The Spartiates formed the backbone of the Spartan army. Their equipment and tactics embodied perfect collective strength. They fought in tight formations, shoulder to shoulder, protecting one another, which is why they were called equals. This equality, however, applied only on the battlefield and in political rights, not in wealth. Each Spartiate had to contribute to the communal messes, syssitia, and maintain a certain economic status, or risk losing his citizenship. This rigid system, combined with high wartime casualties and low birth rates, caused a dramatic decline in the number of full citizens. The Spartiates were the elite in its purest form, a military aristocracy that sacrificed comfort, commerce, and culture entirely to service of the state and war. Their strength lay not in numbers, but in iron discipline, unity, and the belief that it was better to die for Sparta than to live for oneself. The Silver Shields were among the most renowned elite units of the ancient world. Originally, they were selected soldiers known as hypaspists in the army of Alexander the Great. These men formed the king's personal infantry, more mobile than the heavy phalanx but just as disciplined and lethal. During Alexander's eastern campaigns, which extended as far as India, the unit acquired the name Silver Shields, derived from their shields, either plated with silver or polished to shine like metal. The Silver Shields soon became a symbol of power and prestige. The Silver Shields were composed of the most experienced veterans of the Macedonian army, men who had fought in dozens of battles and formed the elite corps on which the king himself relied. They were exceptionally disciplined, highly trained, and equipped with the finest armor of their time. Beyond their role as shock troops, they also served as Alexander's personal guard. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, the Silver Shields became involved in the wars of the Diadochi, the struggles among his generals for control of the empire. Initially, they served under Eumenes of Cardia, a capable strategist attempting to preserve imperial unity. Although the unit distinguished itself repeatedly, they ultimately betrayed Eumenes at the Battle of Gabiene in 316 BC, handing him over to Antigonus I Monophthalmus in exchange for their captured families and accumulated plunder. Antigonus recognized that such a unit of aged but dangerous veterans posed a threat. After his victory, he dispersed them to distant regions of the empire, effectively ending their existence. Despite their demise, the Silver Shields became legendary. Later rulers, particularly in the Seleucid Empire, attempted to recreate them under the same name, though none ever achieved the same reputation. The Praetorian Guard originated during the Roman Republic as an escort for high officials, senators, and legionary commanders. With the advent of the empire, it became the personal guard of the emperor and both a symbol and an instrument of his authority. The first emperor, Augustus, formally organized the Praetorians into a permanent unit in 27 BC to protect his person and ensure the stability of the new political order. Praetorians were selected from the best soldiers of the Roman legions. They were superbly trained, well-equipped, and paid significantly more than ordinary legionaries, reflecting their privileged status. They served not only as the emperor's bodyguard but also as an elite military reserve, intelligence force, and enforcers of order within Rome. Their importance, however, extended far beyond military duties. The Praetorian Guard became one of the most influential political forces in the empire. Positioned at the heart of Roman power, they could determine the fate of emperors. On several occasions, they deposed rulers and installed new ones favorable to them. In AD 41, They assassinated Caligula and proclaimed his uncle Claudius emperor. 2 centuries later, after the death of Emperor Pertinax in AD 193, they went even further by auctioning off the imperial throne to the highest bidder, the wealthy senator Didius Julianus. This act made them a symbol of political decay but also demonstrated the immense power they wielded. After centuries of intrigue, assassinations, and palace coups, the Praetorian Guard became a threat even to the emperors they were meant to protect. Following his victory over Maxentius in AD 312, Emperor Constantine the Great abolished the Praetorian Guard and dispersed its remnants throughout the empire. The Bucellarii were elite cavalry units of the late Roman Empire and became a symbol of both transformation and decline in Roman military power. Their name derives from bucellatum, a type of hard military bread that formed their basic ration. The term first appears during the reign of Emperor Honorius at the turn of the 4th and 5th centuries AD, when powerful generals and officials began forming personal guards and private armies. The Bucellarii were not part of the regular legions but served as personal retainers and elite companions of commanders. These soldiers swore loyalty not to the emperor but to their leader. They were recruited from many peoples: Romans, Goths, Huns, and Persians, and their cavalry units were among the finest in the empire. According to historian John Colston, the Bucellarii formed the core of heavy cavalry in the 5th and 6th centuries, capable of deciding battles through speed, organization, and superior equipment. Their emergence was a direct result of the decline of central authority. Whereas emperors once held a monopoly on armed force, powerful individuals now maintained private armies funded by personal wealth. Despite their problematic political role, the Bucellarii were exceptional soldiers. They received the highest pay, the best equipment from imperial armories, and represented elite forces accessible only to those who could afford them. By the 6th and 7th centuries, the Bucellarii increasingly became mercenaries, often operating independently of the empire, particularly in Italy and the eastern provinces. Their professionalism and military skill made them forerunners of medieval knightly retinues and mercenary companies. The Varangian Guard was an elite unit of the Byzantine army that served as the personal bodyguard of emperors in Constantinople between the 10th and 14th centuries. It became a symbol of loyalty, courage, and unconditional fidelity, qualities Byzantines often lacked in their own troops. The Guard was composed primarily of foreigners from Northern Europe, especially Scandinavia, and later Anglo-Saxon warriors who sought new masters after the Norman conquest of England. The first Varangians entered Byzantine service in the 9th century, but the formal institution of the Guard was established in 988 under Emperor Basil II. He formed it after receiving a force of 6,000 warriors from Vladimir I of Kiev in exchange for military assistance and marriage to the emperor's sister Anna. Basil, wary of the unreliable loyalty of native troops, entrusted his personal protection to foreigners without local ties, bound solely by their oath to him. 4 centuries, Scandinavians, Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes formed the core of the Guard. Renowned for their physical strength and ferocity, Varangians were described in Byzantine chronicles as heavily armed warriors wielding massive axes, standing by the emperor in battle and within the palace itself. After 1066, following the Norman conquest of England, large numbers of displaced Anglo-Saxon warriors entered Byzantine service and soon became the backbone of a new generation of the Guard. By the reign of Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, the Varangian Guard was largely Anglo-Saxon. Over time, its members assimilated culturally and linguistically, yet the Guard remained active until the 14th century. Even as the Byzantine Empire declined, the legacy of the Varangians endured. Chronicles and legends portrayed them as men who knew no betrayal, feared nothing, and whose loyalty to the emperor was stronger than their own lives. Housecarls were elite warriors and personal guards of the Anglo-Danish nobility that ruled England before the Norman invasion of 1066. They were bound by oaths of loyalty, highly trained, well-equipped, and faithful unto death. In the social hierarchy of the time, they stood far above ordinary fighters and formed a professional army rare in medieval Europe. Despite their elite status, Housecarls fought as heavily armored infantry rather than knights. They traveled on horseback but dismounted to fight shoulder to shoulder, maintaining the cohesion characteristic of the Scandinavian shield wall. Their equipment was formidable: long two-handed axes, shields, mail armor, and helmets often fitted with metal masks. Their strength and precision could shatter even the strongest enemy formations. Housecarls were often organized into small tactical units of 3 men. 2 wielded two-handed axes, while the third protected their advance with a spear. These formations were particularly effective in defense and proved capable of holding positions even against heavily armored cavalry, as demonstrated at the Battle of Hastings. Housecarls accompanied their lord in battle and diplomacy alike. Loyalty and honor were binding obligations. Breaking an oath meant loss of status, property, and honor. After the defeat and death of King Harold II at Hastings in 1066, most housecarls fell at his side, symbolically ending the era of Anglo-Saxon military tradition. Survivors often went into exile and found new service in the Varangian Guard. The Mamluks represented a unique phenomenon in the medieval Islamic world, a military elite composed of formerly enslaved foreigners who rose through bravery, discipline, and loyalty to the pinnacle of power. These non-Arab warriors, recruited mainly from Turkic, Caucasian, Balkan, and Eastern European regions, began as slaves but ended as rulers, sultans, and commanders. The Mamluk institution emerged in the 9th century, when Islamic dynasties began purchasing young boys from foreign lands to raise them as professional soldiers entirely loyal to their masters. Raised in military discipline and Islamic faith, they formed an elite class without tribal affiliations and, theoretically, without political ambitions beyond service. Ironically, this rootless caste eventually seized control of the very states it was meant to protect. Although technically slaves, Mamluks enjoyed high status. They could bear arms, own property, and eventually became the backbone of military and administrative power. Their training was uncompromising, encompassing horsemanship, archery, swordsmanship, and absolute obedience. Over time, Mamluks became not only soldiers but rulers, governing as sultans, emirs, and beys, with power derived from military strength rather than heredity. The most significant Mamluk state arose in Egypt. After the fall of the Ayyubids in 1250, the Mamluks seized power and founded the Mamluk Sultanate, which ruled Egypt and Syria for over 2 centuries. During this period, they became one of the world's most formidable armies, defeating the Mongols at the Battle of Ayin Jalut in 1260, halting their expansion into the Islamic world, and expelling the last Crusaders from the Levant in 1302 with the capture of the island of Ruad. The Mamluk Sultanate lasted until 1517, when it was conquered by the Ottomans. Even afterward, until the 19th century, Mamluks remained an influential elite in Egyptian society. Swiss mercenaries were professional soldiers from the cantons of the old Swiss Confederacy who gained fame across Europe from the 14th century onward as seemingly invincible warriors. Their reputation became so formidable that they symbolized reliability, courage, and military excellence, mercenaries capable of defeating the knightly armies of Europe's great powers. Their strength lay in their method of warfare. Dense pike formations armed with long spears and halberds could crush heavy cavalry that had dominated European battlefields for centuries. Trained in the harsh environments of the Alpine cantons, these men advanced as a single organism, precise, relentless, and deadly. Their victories over the Habsburgs, Burgundians, and Milanese forces cemented their status as elite infantry sought by rulers across the continent. Their fame peaked during the Renaissance, when Swiss mercenaries became a major European export. France was their most prominent employer, and Swiss guards protected French kings and fought alongside them in major conflicts of the 15th and 16th centuries. Their loyalty to contract and honor outweighed political ideology. Over time, however, their dominance declined. The spread of firearms and new tactical systems eroded the advantage of Swiss infantry. European rulers adopted their methods and formed their own professional armies, reducing reliance on mercenary forces. Within Switzerland itself, opposition to foreign military service grew, and in the 19th century the country adopted neutrality and isolationism. The last direct heir to this tradition is the Papal Swiss Guard in Vatican City, a small but symbolically powerful unit that has protected the head of the Catholic Church since 1506. The Janissaries were an elite infantry corps of the Ottoman army and for centuries served as the personal guard of the Sultan. From their inception, they represented a revolutionary concept of military power. They were the first truly standing, salaried professional army to make systematic use of firearms. The corps emerged in the 14th century and was based on the devshirme system, the levy of Christian boys from the Balkans, forcibly taken from their families, converted to Islam, and raised as loyal soldiers of the Sultan. Although legally slaves, their status differed markedly from common servitude. They received regular pay, education, and opportunities to rise to high positions in both military and civil administration. Discipline and loyalty to the ruler were the cornerstones of Janissary power. They were forbidden to marry or engage in trade, ensuring complete devotion to state service. At the height of Ottoman power, Janissaries formed its striking force and played a decisive role in the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, as well as in campaigns across the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Middle East. Their training, organization, and firepower were unrivaled in their time and secured the Ottomans' military superiority over their rivals across Europe. Over time, however, the original ideals began to fade. From the 17th century onward, the system of child levy was relaxed, and Muslims from Anatolia, often admitted through bribery, began to enter the Janissary corps. What had once been an elite military formation gradually became a closed, privileged caste that resisted reform and obstructed the modernization of the army. When Ottoman reformers attempted to introduce Western military practices, the Janissaries repeatedly revolted and deposed several sultans. Their resistance to change ultimately contributed to the decline of Ottoman military power. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II decided on the definitive abolition of the Janissary corps. During the so-called auspicious incident, the Janissaries were disbanded and thousands of them were killed. Thus ended the era of one of the most famous and longest-lasting military institutions in history. And that concludes this installment of our overview of elite military units. Stay tuned for the next part, where we will introduce more. Which of today's units do you consider the greatest, and why? Let us know in the comments.